So today we are going to be digging into discussing benchmarking and why it's important for our fundraising work. I want to name that this is a two-part kind of discussion. So today we're going to be talking about why you would benchmark, what are some key benchmarks that we could be recording, obviously answering a bunch of questions. And then next month on November 14th, Sabrina will actually be leading us through a conversation of how you can incorporate benchmarking into your storytelling and how you can actually strengthen your pitch and all of your communication by using benchmarking data. So that is that is what you are here for. Hopefully, that is what you signed up for. Excellent. I see Sam nodding. Love it. All right. So before I dive in, I just want to introduce kind of the folks who are behind the scenes here. So this is the Progressive Multiplier team. These are the amazing folks who partner with Resilience Initiative to bring this to you all. And we've got Sabrina here with us. Sabrina, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Sabrina Orozco, she, her pronouns, based in Los Angeles, and I am the Senior Director of Independent Revenue Generation Strategy and Innovation, and I am happy to be here and chat with you all today. I'm glad it's kind of a small group, so we'll get to one-on-one.
Yes. Um, so I just, I can never stop singing the praises of this team. They are excellent. And I think both obviously in this session, but then also outside of it, they are a great resource. If you have questions, they are always available. So then just very quickly, because I want to make sure everybody knows about the amazing folks at Progressive Multiplier, I want to kind of go over the work that Progressive Multiplier does, which is to build a stronger progressive movement and help our organizations diversify and revolutionize their revenue streams in order to build greater resilience. So in addition to these trainings, they grant money, provide support for organizations, from folks doing everything from like we are building our first CRM and we need help with that, to people who are running the most cutting edge experimentation, like doing the things that all of us are going to be doing like 10 to 20 years from now. And then they package up all those learnings and share them out with everybody, so that we can all be stronger together, which I think is fantastic. And then last but not least, before we get into content, so my name is Maria Chijov. I am a consultant with Progressive Multiplier. I'm also a queer immigrant organizer based in Chicago. Yes. Oh, love that. So I actually originally connected with PM as a grantee. So I was like in your shoes when I was in my previous role at Ultraviolet. And since starting my own consulting practice, ended up becoming a consultant with PM. My organizing is really grounded in mobilizing people at scale to take collective action for liberation. And I see fundraising as a form of organizing. That's kind of where all of my philosophy, and as far as I have it, comes from. And at the end of the day, I do this work because I want to build a world where my wife and kids are safe, valued, and allowed to live their full and most joyful lives, which is why I include a picture of them always. Oh, yes, Pilsen. Oh my gosh, I was actually just there this weekend. So, um, very exciting. So we're gonna get into kind of what we're doing today. And again, because we're a smaller group, this is gonna be even more participatory than it normally is. So I want to go through our learning objectives for today, which are pretty straightforward. So the questions that we're trying to answer with the work that we're doing today is my program working? Are we improving? How do we know that like what we're doing is actually having an impact when it comes to fundraising? And we'll talk about the basics of why we might think about benchmarking, as well as some common pitfalls that folks might fall into when they start thinking about data. And again, we'll get a sense of where folks are in terms of their journey with benchmarking. You might be very much at the beginning, or you might be like, oh, we've been doing this for years, and we just have very specific questions. And then we're going to get into how we actually calculate some of the key metrics that you might use as part of your benchmarking work. The other thing that I will say that you can expect, in addition to our kind of learning objectives, so we're going to be really trying to get into real talk here. And it means like wrestling with some of the tricky things. I know when I've like tried to set up benchmark programs, you run into things like, oh, this data lives in like 6 different departments. And in order to pull it all together, it's really, really hard. We'll get into all of that. So this is not one of those spaces where you're like, okay, this is like the best version of this, but how do I actually do this in the real world? We're really going to talk about how we do this in the real world. I also really hope that this can be a participatory learning experience and that we can learn from each other. Um, and then I also want this to be a place where you can ask all the questions. There's no such thing as a stupid question. There's no such thing as a too simple question or a too complex question. We're here for all of it. And we are going to do some math. And if that's exciting to you, yay. And if you're like, oh my God, I want to run away now, then we're going to do it together. We're going to make it as easy as possible. We actually have some like guided worksheets for you that you can take back so that it's really as straightforward as humanly possible. Okay, so now I'm actually gonna, you know what, since we are a small group, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and get us here. And I would love to just kind of go around. Sam and Haley, can you just share kind of your experience with benchmarking? Is that something you're already doing? Is it something you want to be doing? And then what kind of like big questions are you bringing into the space?
Hi, good morning. My name is Samuel Cortez. I'm artistic director for Lulupeños de San Jose, a Mexican folk dance company in San Jose, California. Uh, I This is my first time. I'm putting dipping my toes into the water to start because I've been on the artistic side all my life, and suddenly my executive director retired, and we've been in the search for a new executive director, and then it didn't work. So we're going from this type of organization to this type of organization, more horizontal leadership. So I knew I know that I don't know that much about fundraising in general. So this is my first touch. So thank you for having me. Yes. However, I'm brand new. I'm brand new. I made small efforts to learn about fundraising, but
Mhm.
I everything is kind of on the go. So I have very little to no experience in benchmarking and all this information. So I'm learning. Thank you for having me.
Amazing. Amazing. Sam, welcome. Definitely please like ask all the questions and really happy to like break things down. And I think we can also talk about other resources that are available beyond this. Sabrina can also share that. What about you, Haley?
I honestly feel the same as Sam. Like I have zero experience. I am, this is my second fundraising role that I've been part of. It's been mostly more in this position grants than fundraising, to be honest. I did do benchmarking in a previous position, where we had a matching grant that we were looking to get donations for. And that was kind of easy because we had a benchmark that was very public. You know, we were inviting people to every time we got, more money. It was always like, here, we're almost there. We're almost there. It created a lot of, it was like, I would say it was like a really easy version of benchmarking, which is like now we don't, in the position I'm in the org I'm in with now, we don't have that sort of thing. So, goals really undefined, you know, budgets, everything up in the air. So yeah, really looking forward to digging into this.
That's fantastic. I love doing this for all sorts of experience levels, but I also love the fact that we have two folks who are like at a similar place. So this is a great moment to like talk about, challenges that you're having, what's working, what's not working. So yay. Okay. So I'm gonna share my screen again. And we're gonna get into like a little bit of background why benchmarking is important. And I actually, Haley, you gave us a really great example of like a benchmark that you had in terms of a matching grant. And I'm curious, Sam, are there any benchmarks that you've thought about tracking in your work, or any data that you're like, this is something that we look at, or this is something that we maybe think about or want to think about?
I'm learning everything on the go. So all this been brand new. I'm building as we speak. We're building a database of every information, every aspect of information that I have in the organization, because nobody ever did it before. Just to clarify, it was two people directing this company before, and now it's 11 of us. So executive
Got it.
director left, and
Got
so
it.
everything is on the go. So I'm trying, but yes,
No,
I have some information, but it's all over the place still.
totally. That totally makes sense. And I actually think this is a perfect, we'll get into something that hopefully will be helpful for you as you're building your database. Um, so I think that, ultimately, I think of benchmarking and data. Anything can be a benchmark. Like anything that you can track can be a benchmark, right? Because it's basically something that we just measure over time. We say, okay, today we have this many donors. A month from now, we measure it again. We have this many donors, etc. So that's like the very, very basics of benchmarking. But I actually want to step back and do a little storytelling to really illustrate like all the ways in which benchmarking can show up in our work. So, Sam, this is an artistic example. So hopefully this will. So I am going to talk about instead of fundraising for a second, I'm going to talk about the guitar. So I play guitar. I'm fairly decent. Maybe one day I will even, give up this whole consulting fundraising thing, and decide to go on tour. So we all have aspirations. So for the purposes of this training, let's say that moment is now, and I have been offered a chance to play the Greek Theater in LA. Like I said, girl can dream. And so you're saying, like, what does this actually have to do with fundraising? So I'm going to use this analogy of a road trip to think about all the different ways that benchmarking shows up in our work. So first of all, number one, here is me sitting in Chicago. This is my starting point. This is where I am today. And this is also the starting point for your program. So this is where we are in this moment. This is the big wins. This is the growth edges. This is we're building out our CRM and have been through a lot of transitions. And in order to know where we're at, in order to really understand where we're at, we need to know from a data standpoint, how are we doing? It's really like, if we don't have that, we don't really know if we're getting better, if we're getting worse, if things are working. So the first place where benchmarking comes in is literally like, it's your baseline. It's how you understand where you're starting from. Now, the second piece here is my destination. I'm trying to get to the Greek Theater. It's my musical goal, or in fundraising terms, it's my fundraising goal. It could be, you could say by the end of this year, we want to double the number of donors, or we want to raise $100,000, or some combination therein. But most likely, whatever goal you're setting has a numeric component. There's something that you can measure. A lot of times we'll also set qualitative goals. So we'll say, I want our donors to feel more connected to our organization. But there's still probably something you're measuring about that. You're not just kind of going off vibes. You're saying, okay, maybe we do a survey at the beginning of the year and we do a survey at the end of the year and we compare that. So you're still collecting data. So then the third piece of this is my actual route. How am I going to get from where I am today in Chicago to where I want to be in LA for my road trip? And I think of this as the tactics that you're doing. So we said, we know where we are today. We know that by the end of this year, we want to double the number of donors we have. Okay, how do we do that? Do we invest in new strategies for bringing in donors? Great. Maybe we're running Facebook ads. Maybe we're having in-person events. All of those things have some data that we're getting back. So we know if we're running Facebook ads, we know how much we're spending, we know how much, folks are donating, who we bring in. We can look at that. And so we can benchmark within that and say, okay, we've tried 3 different ways of bringing in new donors. And I can tell you that, having in-person events is the best strategy for us, because I've looked at the data, I've looked at our benchmarks, and that is something that is the most efficient. We'll actually talk specifically about fundraising efficiency metrics a little bit later on. And then last but not least, the fourth piece of this is the car, right? So I have the route, I know how I'm getting from point A to point B, but if I'm going in like a beater that can't go over 45 miles an hour, this trip is going to take me a lot longer than if I borrow my friend's sports car that's like, doing 90 miles on the highway. So part of benchmarking is also looking at the overall efficiency of our program. Is our car doing well? Are we bringing in folks that are engaging with us, that are donating? Is that improving over time? Is it not? So I give this really extended metaphor because I want folks to think about kind of how benchmarking is not just a silo in our program that we build over here, but it's really something that's part of everything that we do. And I want to just give some examples of, again, we said anything can be a benchmark. So I want to just give some examples of benchmarks that exist that you could use. You could track the number of donors that you have. You could say, right now we have 50 donors. Our goal is 100 donors by the end of the year. Let's track that. You could track your email list size. You could look at the number of average donation size, number of event RSVPs. The point is, the sky is the limit. If you can track it, it could be a benchmark. But what we're going to talk about is, should it be a benchmark? And this is where we can kind of get into what I like to call the Goldilocks problem. So we find our benchmarks by measuring something and comparing data to historic performance. So again, as we go, we're just saying, okay, this is that number, it's growing, it's shrinking, great. However, as we go along, we can run into what is called the Goldilocks problem, what I like to call the Goldilocks problem. As you might remember, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, the little girl wanders into a house inexplicably of bears and eats their food and hangs out and keeps trying everything and is like, this is too hard, too soft, too hot, too cold, until she finds kind of that perfect middle ground. And when we are thinking about our benchmarking, we can also get into this problem of too much, too little, too transparent, not transparent enough. And I sort of think about it on this grid. So if you look at this grid, I look at kind of 2 axes. The first axis is your horizontal axis of what do you measure? And we can be on this spectrum from where we measure nothing, absolutely nothing. We have, we run on vibes, to a place where we measure everything. So we have so much data, it's coming out of our ears, and we actually don't know what to do with it because we're so overwhelmed. Similarly, we have our up and down axes for transparency. So the first piece is, what are we measuring? But the second piece is, who actually sees that information? Do people actually see the data that we are measuring? So at the top, we share all the data. Everything is available for everyone. And at the bottom, we share none of the data. No one knows anything. Now, the challenge, as you can imagine, when we are at the extremes on these ends, it's not great, right? So if let's start over here. So if we measure nothing and tell our team that we measure nothing, our team members are very sad, right? Because people are like, hold on, I don't what are we even doing here? This feels like we're kind of wasting our time. So that's not great. If we measure everything, And we share that with everyone. People are confused. They're like, hold on, there is so much data here. I don't actually know what's important and what's not important. If we measure everything but don't share it with anyone on our team, people get mad because they're like, they know this data exists, but I don't have the information I need to make my decisions. And then if we measure nothing and don't tell anyone about what we are or are not measuring, people are just kind of melting in a puddle on the floor. Like, it's just kind of like, what are we even doing here? So the place that we're trying to get to is this middle ground, where we have the data that we need to make actionable choices. People have access to that data, and that those two pieces combined allow us to get to equilibrium. Now, here's the thing. It's tricky to get there. And this is one of those things, especially when we're starting out, it is very likely that we are too much to one direction or too much to another direction. So actually the first thing that we're going to do together in a second is we're actually going to try and kind of map our organization where we are on these two axes. And then we'll talk about how we shift ourselves a little bit in. And it's possible that you are very much on one of the extremes. It's possible that you're like, we're like kind of close to the middle, but not quite there. All of that is totally fine. So again, I sort of think of this, we're going to go through this exercise together, but I think of this as there's kind of 5 points that we can put ourselves on the x-axis, 5 points on the y-axis. And the way we're going to do that is we're actually going to talk through some activities, some sort of evaluation metric, and then we'll talk about our numbers and where we are. So if everyone can grab a piece of paper, just really quick, you're going to write down 2 numbers. This is not going to be a big writing activity. So the first question I have for you is, when you think about what you measure, where would you put your organization on the spectrum? Write down a 1 if you have no consistent system for measuring data. Maybe sometimes you like record some things, but like it's not really, there's no sort of consistent system, rhyme or reason to it. 5 is you measure everything, like literally, open rates, unsubscribe rates, how many times this person emailed us, everything. There's so much data that, your spreadsheets have spreadsheets. And then, the middle ground here would be that you measure key actionable data points, and that information is like easily available to make decisions. And then obviously there's also sort of 2 and 4. Feel free to, like, if you're like, we have some measurement and maybe it's like a little bit more consistent than not, but we're still not quite to a 3, maybe you're a 2.5. Everybody got a number for data measurement? I'm seeing some nods. Okay. All right. So now let's move on to data sharing. So again, you are a 1 if your data is locked up tighter than Fort Knox. Like, no one knows what's over there. It exists, it's just no one knows it. And number 5 is you have data that is freely available to anyone and everyone, with no guidance and no kind of system around it. Like, if someone has a question, you say, or someone on your team says, go look at a spreadsheet. And that person's like, cool, but like, what does that actually tell me? And then the middle ground here is we're sharing data in a consistent and organized manner and have guidance for how people interpret it. So maybe there's a standing meeting, folks know what they're looking at. And again, we can be somewhere in between. We might have data sharing with our team sporadically, but not with consistency. We might have a bunch of data that people can look at, and every once in a while we provide some guidance, but there's no consistency, whatever that point may be. So we now have 2 numbers, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I would love for folks, if you feel comfortable, like, share either 1 or both, like where you find yourself on the spectrum and how does that influence your work?
For me, it's chaos. We have like in the 2-2, we do have some information, but it's all over the place. We share some information, but most of the time it's like, hey, I got this information for you available. And everybody's like, oh, thank you, move. and then keep going. So then we are struggle when we really need that information and like, where is it? And like, just go and look for it. It's chaos. So, like I said, it has to be basically because it was two people and now it's just me.
Yeah.
But it's there, but it's not organized.
Yep, totally. And we'll talk in a second about how we sort of shift ourselves, but I'd love if anyone else can share kind of where they are on the spectrum, either one or both numbers, and how does that impact what you're doing?
Well, this is great because I'm also 2 and 2 with you, Sam. So we have data, we have a CRM that logs things. It's all there. If we need to find stuff, sometimes we can find it. It's pretty demoralizing when you know, we don't, we're feels like you're kind of measuring against an unknown. So you can't ever actually tell how well you're doing with things. Or numbers like don't make sense. So yeah, we're thinking about changing CRMs. It's that bad.
Yep. And there's some great resources that we can share about CRMs that PM has available as well. And welcome, Marissa and Sophia. Welcome. We're kind of a small group, so if you all actually want to just jump in really quick and share before we do this exercise. If you want to just introduce yourself and share kind of your level of experience with benchmarking and data so that we can get a sense of who's in the room.
Hi, happy to go, but I apologize. I'm actually in transit, so I'm gonna probably be in and out of this session, but just wanted to listen in. Marissa Barron, Growing Justice Fund. We are a newer organization, a couple years old, and have just started to look at kind of high level data across our fund, and I think are really looking at finding a balance between what we ask of grantees, but also being able to effectively measure that. So appreciate this conversation as we kind of think through that. And apologies if I get called on and may not be able to answer in a little bit when I'm going through the airport. Thank you.
You're totally fine, Marissa. Yes, thank you for joining us. I know that I have done these in transit, so we'll also have a recording that we'll send out. So if there's anything that you miss, you can catch up. And then Sophia, do you want to just kind of introduce yourself and share where you're at?
Yeah, hey y'all. I'm Sophia. I work at an organization called Hidden Villa. I'm also kind of in between things this morning, so I might have to step out a little bit early. Let's see here, also have a CRM. I'm kind of curious about, I kind of jumped in when you all are talking about like how we're like evaluating things. And so I'm not sure if we're talking like specifically on the fundraising side or like on the outcome, like program impact side of things. I assume fundraising because this is kind of a fundraising thing, but it did just make me think about the multiple things that we're evaluating as an organization and consistency of reporting out to like our stakeholders, our staff, both on the fundraising and the program impact side. And so, yeah, thank you for having us.
Amazing. And Sophia, yeah, so I'm going to be really anchoring in fundraising in our conversation, but I think a lot of this can be applied also on the program impact side. And more importantly, Sabrina is going to be doing a part 2 to this, which is actually going to be all about how we use benchmarks to actually tell the story internally, externally. So there will be more on that specific piece coming November 14th. Okay, so I'm glad this is helpful. And one thing that I'll say, again, you'll get all these materials. It's actually really helpful to take this back to your team and have them do this exercise. Because sometimes one thing that I found when I've done this internally is different people might have different perceptions, especially if you have kind of cross-department teams. Some teams might be like, I think we have a lot of data and no one ever shares it with me. And other departments might be like, there's no data. What are you talking about? And that actually also tells you something, again, about how different teams experience the benchmarks that you have. Okay, so I promised that we weren't just going to kind of try and diagnose. We were actually going to then take a look and see how do we shift ourselves one way, the other, kind of on this axis. And one thing that I will also say is that Nothing is fixed in time. Our organizations are always in a state of flux. So this is not one of those things where you're like, we have reached equilibrium and now, there's trumpets and we're just celebrating and we're going to be here forever. This is really a constant thing where you need to be adjusting and thinking about, okay, do we have a bunch of new folks on our team? Do they know our systems? Do they understand how things work? So that's I'll name some ideas for how we can shift ourselves, and also that this is going to be a constant kind of process that we will always be thinking about. Okay, so let's say that you are, and I know we had a couple of folks who were like in that 2 category. So you're like, we measure some things, we don't really have consistency around it. We don't really feel like we have a set system. One suggestion that I could offer in that situation is thinking about really coming back to your goals. What are the organizational goals? What are the fundraising goals? And what are 3 to 5 measurable things that you need to know to gauge that performance? It doesn't have to be everything, right? If you try and measure everything, you're going to very quickly find yourself on the opposite end of the spectrum at a 5. But if you can think about starting from your goals, again, let's say your goal is to double the number of donors that you have. Okay, what do you need to know in order to make decisions about, how well that's going, whether or not we're meeting our goals, etc. And I will say, if someone finds themselves on the opposite side of this, or if you sort of overcorrect and kind of flip over to the other side, you can also look at the full list of what you have available to you. Haley, you sort of said that you're in the 2 category, but like there is data, there's a bunch of data available to you. So you could also think about like, what's all the information that's available to me? What's all the stuff that I know I could find? And then from that list, let's narrow out, again, 3 to 5 things that are actually going to be the top priority. And I will also say that having those 3 to 5 things really helps if you are in a fundraising department, or if you are in the fundraising capacity in an organization. It helps to bring other people in, because when there's like a core set of things that you're sharing out with your team, and they know that as an organization, we really care about these 3 benchmarks, and I understand why, and I know what they are, it's going to make it a lot easier for other people to be brought into the work. Okay, so then let's say now we're sort of on the up and down axis, the data sharing. So let's say you share all the data, but there's not really guidance around it. One thing you can do is actually like talk to your team members and get a sense of their comfort and understanding of the data available. I have done this before, and folks have been like, yeah, no, actually the spreadsheets that you keep sharing with me scare me, and I just close them and don't look at them. And you probably have a sense of like, yeah, this person's really not looking at this, but actually like finding out why. Are they feeling overwhelmed? Do they feel like it doesn't relate to their work? And then based on that, you can actually have some sets of trainings available for folks, as well as an information sharing cadence. I am always a big fan of having be it a quarterly meeting, be it part of your monthly meetings, whatever the cadence is, where you actually have kind of a guided data sharing experience, so that folks are actually able to ask questions and say, hey, I've noticed that this number dipped. Is that important? Why do you think that is? Again, data is only useful if we're actually having conversations about it and using it to inform our work. And then similarly, if you find yourself in a place, I don't think anyone sort of shared this, but if you find yourself in an organization where there is data, but it's like so closely guarded that no one has access to that, it's a good moment to pause and say, okay, why? Why is it that we have that we are so kind of precious about our data and hold it so close? It might be that there's actually a really good reason for some of it. I worked at an organization that had no NDA for any consultant, and therefore did not share data with any of our consultants, and also didn't share data with staff because they were afraid that they were going to share the data with the consultants. Now, it's really important to have data privacy. Like if you have a list of funders, you don't want to just be giving that out willy-nilly. But also, if you have folks coming in who are trying to do work with you, who are trying to support you, maybe there are systems you can put in place that can help you create the conditions for being more open and being more transparent. And a lot of times this might be a conversation that actually needs to happen between departments, or maybe with some of the folks like higher up in the organization who are kind of setting policy. And you can say, look, I get why we're saying this, but here's the impact on our work. Can we think about how we work through this? Maybe it's an NDA policy, maybe it's a training, maybe it's, creating settings within our CRM where different people can see different amounts of data based on their position. Whatever it might be, it's a really helpful conversation. Okay, so let's see, let's move ourselves along. Okay, I want to pause now. Does anyone have any, are there any questions that are coming up? We've talked about kind of how we locate ourselves on this data measurement, data sharing grid. We're going to move into kind of defining and calculating some key metrics. But before we do that, are there any questions that are coming up for folks?
I am digesting everything.
Amazing. I love that. Totally. And also feel free, as we're going through, if you're like, oh, actually, here's a question that I have, or here's something that's popping into my head, feel free to also drop it in the chat. But yeah, if any questions come up, let me know. If not, we're gonna move right along to looking at a couple of key metrics that we can that we could use. This is an offering and a way of thinking about some of the things that we could be implementing in our program and what data we need in order to implement them. So we're going to go back to our road trip. And really quickly, Marissa, Sophia, I'm not sure if you all joined before or after, but I've sort of been using this extended metaphor of a road trip from Chicago to LA to talk about how benchmarking is a key part of every aspect of our fundraising work and not just something that we sort of silo over here. So back to our example. As I'm on my road trip, as I am driving from Chicago to LA, I probably want to make sure that, this is actually worth my time, that the performance fee that I'm getting for playing my guitar at the Greek Theater, I'm at least breaking even, because I don't want to be going into debt. So I'm thinking about three kind of metrics in the context of this road trip. The first is cost per dollar raised. So in our road trip analogy, this is literally how much am I making? How much am I getting paid for this gig? And then how much money am I spending on gas, car maintenance, snacks? And for every dollar that I am paid, am I spending less than $1 or more than $1, right? So if I go into 7-Eleven and I spend $500 on snacks, and I have, $500 in gas and car maintenance fees, and I'm only being paid $500 and I'm spending $1,000, this is the math here is not working out well for me. So literally this is a dollar amount, cost per dollar raised. The next is our fundraising return on investment. This is another way to look at the efficiency of this trip. Am I making or losing money by driving all the way to this gig? Basically, does this even make sense for me? And we'll talk about kind of some of the differences of how you could think about these two. And then the final metric is donor lifetime value, which in the context of my road trip is a longer term metric. So I have my first performance at the Greek Theater. I wow the venue manager, they love me, and they want to book me every year to come back. And I've built this long-term relationship. Okay, so what is the lifetime value over the course of our relationship for, my residency at the Greek? Is this going to be something that's going to be worthwhile for me? So this is kind of, again, this is within the context of our road trip, but I want to give you all just the actual straight fundraising definitions as well. So again, Cost per dollar raised is a measure of fundraising efficiency that calculates how much you paid to raise each additional dollar. So this you get literally like hopefully a less than dollar amount. So like let's say I paid 60 cents and I made $1. Congratulations, you're doing great. I paid $1.50 and made $1. Maybe things aren't going so well, right? The next is your ROI. So this is a percentage measure of fundraising efficiency. And it compares basically like your net profit to how much you spent. So again, if we have, if my ROI is greater than 0, good. If my ROI is less than 0, that means I am losing money, and maybe we need to rethink what we're doing here. And last but not least, we have our donor lifetime value. So this is the predicted average dollar amount that a donor will give to your organization over their lifetime. So this is something that is really helpful if we have some historical data. We'll talk about calculating each of these, but it really helps us understand, okay, this group of people, do we feel like, what do we think their sort of lifetime projection is going to be? Again, we're operating in averages here. We know that every single donor is an individual who makes their own decisions, but for the purpose of benchmarking, we're really kind of looking at averages. These are our 3 kind of metrics that we're going to dig into. I'm going to break these down a little bit more, and we'll talk about what data we need, why we want to look at them. Does anybody have any questions about these definitions? Good? Clear? Yay? Awesome. Love it. Okay, so let's talk about donor lifetime value. We talked a lot earlier about how one of the ways to make our benchmarks really useful is to actually like have them answer a question. So we're not just tracking data for data's sake, we're actually tracking data because we have a question that we want answered. So this idea of donor lifetime value, so the amount that a donor is going to donate to your organization over their lifetime. Can you, let's just think for a moment, what are some questions that we think that could help answer? Or why would that information be useful to you in your work?
It would tell us like where to focus on our asks.
Can you, yeah, Haley, can you unpack that a little bit? I love that.
Yeah, like we recently had a fundraiser gala, which, you know, didn't yield as much donations as we would like. And I think we knew that going in, but because we didn't have metrics to say, look, we could just ask this one person for $5,000 instead of having, you know, a ton of staff time and a ton of coordination to do this event to get less than that, you know, it would be nice to be able to show that data.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love that example. Yes, so we can look, you know, we can look at the donor lifetime value of our entire donor universe. We could also break it down and say, actually, we find that there's this category of folks who are more likely to give to our organization. They give more, and they are, that's where we want to be investing, as opposed to maybe some other, you know, tactics that bring in folks that might be more staff intensive and not yield what we want. So a couple of things, here's a couple of like potential questions that you could be answering. One is, should I prioritize recurring or one-time gifts? This is a question that folks run into sometimes where, okay, I have one person and they're giving me $5 every month, and they've been with us for a long time. So that kind of adds up to a lot of money. But then I have this other person who's giving me $100, and that's money in the bank right now. How do I even compare that, right? Because if I look at like, you know, if both of these people started their donations this month, person A gave me $5, person B gave me $100. Okay, like that, obviously, that comparison, one of those is clearly better than the other. But if that person who's giving me $5 has been with our organization for 10 years, and they're going to keep giving to us, the math actually shifts on that. So it can really help us think about like, what do we want to prioritize? Where do we want to put our efforts? Another piece is, how do different acquisition sources compare over time? So Haley gave this example of like, we can do this big gala, or we can have like invest in one-on-ones with a bunch of our major donors. I don't know, maybe the one-on-ones are actually going to be more effective. Again, for all of these examples, there's a bunch of other considerations. Like for a gala, there's sort of like communications considerations and organizational priorities and blah, 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 blah. But again, it's really helpful to have some concrete data that you can anchor in, and then also think about all the other pieces that go into our considerations. You might also have a consultant that comes to you and says, I worked with this client, and their donor lifetime value went up by $300, and it's now $500. And they give you this data, and you're like, okay, is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. It can really help you kind of evaluate those statements. So in terms of the data that we need for this, we need to know our average donor lifespan. So how long is someone with us? And this is something that, again, is a little bit easier to calculate if you have recurring donors. You can say, okay, they joined on January 2020. They stopped giving to us on February 2023. So that was roughly about 3 years, right? If you have one-time donors, you can also sort of think of how you would think of their donor lifespan. Maybe you could look at how many, they started giving to us 2 years ago. They gave $100 then, they didn't give anything, and then they gave $100 this year. Okay, how do we actually want to think about that? This is one of those pieces that I actually really encourage folks to have like a conversation internally about how we measure things. Because one of the things, I think, Haley, you brought this up, where it's like, there's data, but people don't quite agree on how to interpret the data, or also like the data is hard to compare. If we don't have kind of a set understanding of what this means internally, it can be really, really hard to, like, it's like we're talking about two different things, right? The next piece is average donation. On average, how much do your donors give? Is it, again, for recurring donors, our average donation is $10 a month. We have some people giving 20, some people giving 5. It averages out to about 10. For our one-time donors, maybe they only donated once and they gave $100. Maybe they donated 3 times over the course of 5 years, and it averages out to like $200. Whatever it might be. Again, we need to have our own definition of this to really make sure we're all on the same page. And the last is average donation frequency. Again, recurring donors, super easy. They give monthly, they give quarterly, they give whatever period. If you're looking at your one-time donors, again, you want to define kind of what that looks like. So I'm going to show you kind of the way that this all maths together. So it's 3 pieces of data, but the easy thing is that we now multiply them all together, right? So we basically take our average donor lifespan times our average donation times our average donation frequency, and we get a dollar amount. So how it works is, let's say I know that the average donor to my organization gives to us for 5 years. That's kind of that's their lifespan. That's how long they're with us. And they give the average donation of $10. Great. And they give 2.5 times a year. Again, this is an average. That's why we're looking at 2.5. We don't like, what is a half gift? But we've averaged it out. It's 2.5 times per year. And where we end up with is $125 donor lifetime value. Now, what can I do with this information? One, I can look at this over time. Maybe I am really focused on increasing average donation this year. That's like one of our goals. So I can calculate my donor lifetime value at the beginning of the year. I can look at it at the end of the year, and obviously as we go along, and see how our focus on increasing average donation actually helped us drive up our donor lifetime value. I can also use it to compare different acquisition streams. So I have folks who are coming in off of, say, Facebook ads and I have folks coming in from in-person events, and I'm actually finding that my in-person events, even though they cost more, are bringing in a higher donor lifetime value than our Facebook ads. Okay, that's interesting. That's something that I should think about. So that's some of the things that we can do with donor lifetime value. Any questions? Nope. All right. Rolling right along. Now we're going to talk about fundraising efficiency. So donor lifetime value lets us look at kind of the big picture. Fundraising efficiency, I like to think of this as something that we think about per tactic. So if we have a fundraising tactic that we're launching, and we want to know, is this working? Do I need to dial this up? Is it not working? Do I need to dial it down, etc.? So what are some things that, like, knowing how efficient a fundraising tactic is? I guess I sort of answered this question, so I'll give you my examples. So how do I effectively allocate my budget is one question that you can answer, right? So your boss comes to you and says, okay, you have $10,000. What do you want to spend it on? And you could say, well, actually, based on our data last year, I know that the ROI on Facebook ads is really great. So, like, let's put more of our money towards that, and let's dial down our, I don't know, Google ads, whatever you might be doing. You might also, so I have often been in conversations with folks where people have said to me, Maria, Facebook ads are great. It's super cheap. It costs us like 30 cents to acquire someone new to our list. And I say, cool, that's great, but are they actually donating? Like, what's the return on that investment? And they're like, yeah, maybe not, but it's so cheap. And then we say, okay, well, what about this other tactic? Let's say they're, direct mail. It is a lot more expensive to send out direct mail. But the return on investment maybe is a lot higher. So a lot of times if we just look at how much something costs and we don't actually look at our return on investment, we are putting money into the cheap thing, but the cheap thing is actually not giving us the result that we want to see. So it's a really good way to be able to have that conversation, especially if someone that you're talking to has sticker shock and is like, but this costs $50 per donor. And you're like, cool, yes, but that donor is actually bringing in $500 versus our Facebook ads that are not even breaking even. Like, where should we be investing, right? And then the other piece, we talked a little bit about this of, like, how do we illustrate the efficiency and the effectiveness of our fundraising program? As we're telling the story internally, as we're telling the story to funders, Sabrina's going to talk more about this, but this is a really great way to kind of show in numbers, like, oh, this is working, this is not working. We're going to stop doing the thing that's not working. We're going to dial up the thing that's working. So the good news is, for calculating both ROI and cost per dollar raised, you just need two things. You need the amount that you raised, and you need the amount that you spent. I will also name, because we said this would be a real talk space, total spent can often live outside of your department. So you might need to go and talk to someone else and be like, okay, I need to actually, like, gather this data from a bunch of different places. I will say, as you are, especially because I know some folks are just building out their program, making sure that you have a clear way of getting that information, getting how much money you've spent back is really important. So I would definitely, like, put time on the front end to be able to, like, have that information readily available so that you can look at efficiency as part of the work. So again, we know that we have two things that we can calculate. The first is ROI. And this is, we look at our total raised minus total spent. So, like, what is our net profit divided by the total spent? So here's an example of how that plays out. We raised $5,000 from our luncheon. We had a donor luncheon, and we raised $5,000. It cost us $3,000 to put on that event. We had to pay for the food, we had to pay for the space, $3,000. And then we divided by the total that we spent. and we get a percentage. Now, where this percentage is useful is I can look at my ROI from my donor luncheon versus my ROI from other things that I've done, and I can compare those percentages, and that can help me understand where should I be investing or not. I personally will say I prefer ROI as a percent based. My brain works well that way. That being said, if you're like, well, percents make my head hurt, another way you could think about it is thinking about cost per dollar raised. And that is literally just the total that you spent divided by a total that you raised. So again, we spent $3,000 on our luncheon. We raised $5,000, means that we paid 60 cents for each dollar that we raised. The lower your CPDR, you're doing great. The higher it is, if it's over $1, you're not breaking even. So then we can think about, okay, is this, why is that? So this is kind of, these are the math pieces. What I would love to do now, and we'll just do this like as a group, is we're actually going to do we're going to do like a little worksheet to try and put this into practice and try and have it make sense. So we're not going to divide into groups. We are a group here. And I know, Marissa, you said you were in transit, so absolutely no worries. We'll share this with you so that you can have access to it. So Sabrina is gonna, thank you very much. Sabrina just put a Google Doc in the chat. So there's gonna be 2 questions there. And then Sabrina, do you wanna also share the calculator link? So yeah, so the first link that's in the chat right now is a worksheet with 2 questions on it. And the second thing that Sabrina is about to share is actually a calculator that you can use. So you don't have to do the math. You can just kind of input the numbers. And we can look. I'm actually going to pull up this worksheet and let's look at it together. Oh, how do I? There we go. Okay, we're going to look at it together, and I would love to hear from folks how you are thinking about these problems. So the first problem is you are in a pitch meeting with a new fundraiser, and they're bragging about how a comparably sized client of theirs, after working with this consultant, has increased their donor lifetime value to $500. And they're like, it's so amazing. This is like the best outcome. And you're not sure what to make of that. You're like, well, they're telling me a good story, but how does that compare to what we have? So you decide to pull the data from your database and calculate the donor lifetime value of your existing list. So this is, let's say this is your entire donor list here. We have it for you. We know how long these folks have been members. We know their average donation, and we know the average number of donations, or actually, rather, we know how long they've been members. We know their donation, so how much they've donated, and we know the average number of times per year that they donate. So if we want to calculate the donor lifetime value of this group of donors, how do we think we're going to do that? Does anybody, and again, because we're a small group, does anybody have any thoughts on how we might do it? Yeah, Sam, go ahead.
I'm trying to figure it out. It should be individual, but one by one, or there's any way to do it all of them at once.
Yeah. So actually, let me. So Sam, actually, do you want to say what you want to do, and then talk us through the math, and then I can show the answer spreadsheet as well.
Yes, like finding how much money, how much is the DLV for a car, and find it, multiplying the years for the average donation, and the final number, the actual DLV per person. But then I need to figure out how to find a general one.
So I will, that is absolutely correct. Let me, I'm I'm going to pull up the data for this actually. So yes, so let's just get this spreadsheet. Okay. Yeah. So absolutely. So if you had access to the spreadsheet, you would just go I'm gonna total all of this, get to an average across these pieces, and then I can look at my DLV for my list. And I find out that my DLV is $1,516. So I can come back to that consultant and say, no, thank you. Like, no deal, right? Now, if, and again, this is one of those places where like the story sounds great, but is it actually something that works for us? And then similarly, we're going to scroll right on down here. So now we're looking at, we have three kind of tactics that we have been using to acquire new donors this year. And we're in a budget meeting. And our supervisor wants to know how we would allocate the budget for next year. We have a $10,000 budget. And so we can look at all of these different tactics. And again, if we're not using our fundraising efficiency metrics, a lot of times people will be like, oh, look, Facebook ads, that was cheap, let's do more of that, right? And they'll say, oh, direct mail, way too expensive, like, no thank you. But if we use our fundraising ROI metrics, how would we think about this? How would we think about comparing all of these? I'll give folks a couple minutes to like do the math and see where folks land, and then we can talk about what we think is where you would allocate where would you allocate money across the three tactics if you are optimizing for money raised. So you want to spend your $10,000 to raise the most money possible. Where would you put your money?
Quick reminder, we gave you guys that calculator tool, so you guys don't have to do the number punching on your own. Just a hint.
Totally fine, Marissa. Thank you for hopping on.
Direct mail, of course, more money raised. Better
Uh,
cost.
Wait, sorry, say that again.
Uh, I'm sorry, I lost it. Direct mail is better return. That's per
Okay.
dollar raised.
Okay. Um,
I'm
let's
thinking.
take a look at that. So I will here, I'm gonna share my my screen. So Okay, so in this, I've actually calculated both CPDR and ROI.
And ROI.
Yeah, just to look at this. So if we look at CPDR, right? So we're dividing our amount spent by amount raised, and we're getting. So we're getting 75 cents, 71 cents, and then 45 cents on our acquisition ads. Is that, Sam, is that in line with what you got?
Yes.
Okay. So looking at the CPDR, the cost per dollar raised, we spent 75 cents to raise $1 for Facebook ads. We spent 71 to raise $1 for, or 71 cents for direct mail, and 45 cents for paid lead acquisition. So I would, again, looking at this column, and ROI kind of tells us the same story, right? And they should, if you're doing CPDR and ROI, they should show you the same thing at the end of the day. So
Yes.
based on this, I am seeing that paid lead acquisition is actually my best bet. And if I look
Yes.
at this, I actually like more than doubled the amount of money that I
Correct.
raised more than double than what I spent. Um,
Correct.
so that's, one way to think about it. That being said, we also said the other version of this is how much did I spend per donor? Okay. This is where we can look at the number of donors that we've acquired and how much we spent for that, right? So for Facebook ads, I spent 75 cents for each person, right? I acquired $1,000. I spent 750. Do my little quick division here. Okay, so that's cool. I spent 75 cents. For direct mail, I only got 500 new donors, and I spent $5,000. So I spent 10.
Yeah.
That one's expensive, right? Per
That's
person.
very expensive.
Yes. Um, and then for paid lead acquisition, I actually spent $1.50 for each donor, but my cost per dollar raised was really low. So again, this is where we sort of get into this question of what's the thing that we're optimizing for? There might be moments where, let's say you have a matching grant and your funder says, if you raise this much money, we'll match it. And in that moment, you're optimizing for return on investment for amount raised, right? But then you have another situation where you have discovered a way to really deepen engagement with donors, and you want to grow your donor universe and bring in as many people as possible. And then you have a strategy where you're actually going to like do more stuff with them. You're going to, build more relationships with them. And that's part of your like overall plan. That might be a moment where you're actually optimizing for cost per
Right.
donor. So again, all of these things, all of this needs to make sense in your strategy is kind of I would say the bottom line here. That being said, that's kind of our wrap up. Um, I'd love to, Sam, I know you said you were kind of still digesting. Is there anything,
Yes.
is there anything that's coming to mind as you're thinking about, or like, if you just want to talk about kind of what you're thinking about with the program that you're building out, happy to do that.
We serve a large community in East San Jose. We work with a Mexican community, and we have an endowment, which makes things a little bit easier for us somehow. And we receive grants, federal grants, and local grants. Now things are changing, so
Yeah.
things are changing. And that's
Yep.
all I can say. So we are trying to figure out ways to do this. So the donor identification, the donor raising, it's been kind of a on the back burner because
Mm,
we already have grants coming in. We already have the endowment. So we haven't worried that much about it. But I keep telling them in the back of my head, like we don't build the donor, a constant donor system. This is gonna go down the drain really fast. So we need to think about it in the long run, not just for the immediate 10 years. So all this is in the back of my head, believe it
Yeah.
or not, even to start, I'm talking about 10 years ago, I said, hey, we need to invest more money and in get grants. At the beginning, they said, hey, there's no point. You spending more time, we paying you more than the amount of money that you bring in. But I said, yes, but the lifespan of the grants coming in and the long run is gonna change everything. And I fought them. I literally, my board of directors are like, this is so worth it. Wait for it. Please trust me. And they did fine. Just go ahead and do it. And that changed the route of that we were going on. So now we are healthier because we receive really, really important grants. So
Love
all
that.
this is digesting. All these terms are new for me. I've been doing everything on the go without knowing the actual names for them. So
Well,
uh,
but I think like Sam, like it's totally like so much of this is so intuitive. Like you were already having these conversations, and now you can just be like, and actually, here's the term for what
yes,
I'm trying to explain to you.
yes. Now I can say, hey, did you evaluate the ROA? And they started asking and saying the actual name for them. Yes. However, I always have these problems, like the one that you presented right now. In a quick look, this math is going to be very helpful because I was rushing to it. I was trying to like, hey, am I doing this right? And then I saw that the number was the higher, but the higher was the cost per dollar. I'm like, oh, I did it the other way around. So yes, I need to really digest this tabulation, this type of work that you guys are doing, and it's very, very helpful because I can see it from another angle, and I start to understand that the long term, the lifespan of a donor. So I think that is very relevant, and believe me, I'm very excited because this is so new for me in a
Oh,
way, but
yeah.
I've been doing it for so long at the same time that it start to kind of, it's like you put a light on something, you put it, they connect and like, boom, and then they connect and like, boom. Okay, okay, I'm getting this. Yet, I need to digest it. I really need to
Totally.
digest this. This is very, very interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, it's hard to
So I
get.
have tons of questions, but
Yeah. And
I need to
feel
digest
free
first.
to ask them because sometimes it's hard. Like it's intimidating when you like their terms like donor lifetime, like, you know, all these things, ROI. Like when someone says, what's your ROI on that program? It's intimidating because it's math and it's not something that as, I was an art major. I did not want to go into math. I studied art so that I didn't have to do math. So when I have to do these things, it's intimidating, but really it does
Very.
help tell that story one to your board. It'll help make that case like I have concrete numbers to show you why we need to make that investment now for a longer term success, and it'll help tell your story to your donors about help you tell the story correctly so that the audience you should be focusing on, who your people are, what the capacity is, and that's what we'll get into in our next session in November. But it helps tell that a little bit and it helps you understand too. And I hope this conversation, as like a newcomer into this space in your organization, helps you kind of identify like where your gaps are. Like, oh, I actually don't know how many donors we have. That might be something like I'm going to go hunt and fish and figure out how many donors we have. What's our
Already
average
thinking about it.
donation? Yeah. So I hope it's helped you kind of like jog that, like, oh, I don't know what that is, and I'm going to go look for it. And like, maybe it'll help also reframe like what Maria was talking about. Like, maybe you have an understanding, Maria mentioned this before, of like, you have an understanding of what the data is, but maybe there's another person who's done this a little bit more or has another insight and they're like, actually, no, we don't have anything. Like we don't have this. And then that'll help set your plans, right? So if you don't have your data, you're like, okay, what do we need to do to acquire that data? What system do we need to implement to start, being able to calculate these correctly? So I hope that's helped jog and help, set you on a good pace as you're starting on this journey.
I'm excited. We don't have a CRM.
Okay. A lot of organizations don't. So don't, a lot of people, based on the organizational need that they have, CRMs are, I'm not going to lie, super helpful in collating that, your data and making sure you have a safe, central space for all your, fundraising strategy. But a lot of organizations don't. They, will use free softwares. I know I work with a couple organizations that use Airtable, and that, use other kind of systems and softwares that are available to them in sheets and stuff. So we can talk about that. What I am going to do really quick, Sam and Maria, I know
Yes.
you might want to do this, is I'm going to put a link to, we have at Progressive Multiplier a resource library it's a free resource library on fundraising that we make available. It's for free. You just have to register, and it has trainings, toolkits, case studies on anything you can think of in the fundraising sphere. And it really helps kind of break down anything you might be interested in. So individual giving, grassroots giving, institutional like grants, again, we break that down and we provide tools and trainings. And this training, you'll be able to go back to it because it'll live there too. But there are other things on there that, just in case you're interested, I wanted to lend that to you so that you have a resource to fall back on.
This is perfect. Like I said, I used to have an executive director. So just for you to give a quick reference, we serve like more than 200 families. We have an academy that serves a lot of families. We have a dance company, a performing dance company, a youth performing dance company. We serve a large community. Yet it was moved by two people, my executive director and me. So for years it was just the two of us. So we understood each other really fast. We were able to sit down in front of the board and say like, hey board, this is what we need, this is what we have, and this is where we're going. Let's go. Boom. And then the organization started growing. And the problem is my executive director that was magnificent at calculating all these things and doing all the numbers, crunching the numbers and having everything ready. He was magnificent. He was amazing. So he left. Now we're in trouble because nobody's doing these things. And I said, you know what? While we get these people, the adequate person to come in and help, I want to learn as much as I can. So all this information is hitting the spot. Is really what I needed. I know I'm not gonna become an expert in all of it fast, but my understanding of the basics will help to really deepen into the person coming in so I can have an actual conversation. Because keep in mind, I'm artistic director. This was not in my doing the PR that I've been doing the cultivating the stakeholders and all that. All those things were so far out of my job, but I'm loving them. I'm loving it. I'm loving it. And maybe I'm gonna be the next executive director instead of only the
Yeah,
artistic director.
there you go. I am right with you, Sam. Like I said, I was an art major in college. I did not, I told everyone I'm not going to do math. And then I became a fundraiser and I realized I'm doing more math than I probably have ever done. Spreadsheets, I'm talking about numbers, and it is, sometimes I laugh a little bit. I'm like, oh, silly me. I should have just, stayed on with that business degree instead of getting that art degree. So definitely understand that.
And I
It
will
is
say,
very weird. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say like you're in the right crew because I was a history major. I'm an organizer. I want to talk to people, get me out there, like talking to people, sitting in front of a spreadsheet doing math. It's sort of like you kind of, you do the thing that you have to do in order to get the thing done. And I think there's a lot of folks like that in the like PM kind of sphere. And I think that's where the convergence is so helpful because literally like there's both trainings on there, but the other piece is like, if you're ever like, you know what, I need a template for how to do budgeting, it's on there. I need a template for how to do how to make a pitch deck for a funder, it's in there. So it really can be very helpful so you don't feel like you're reinventing the wheel and like sitting there with like Google and being like, how do I do this? Like check
I
out the
just
sure.
Believe it or not, just right now in this quick meeting, gave me the arguments to debate. We have a temporary executive director that didn't work, and she was doing some weird things like asking our administrative assistant to do things to bring things, items, fundraising, quote unquote, for the organization. But he was bringing very little, and I was like, I don't think the ROI makes sense. The He's investing a lot of time to bring very little. And but she was bragging about, hey, I put him to do this, and we have a box of tangerines for this event that we're gonna have there. And I'm like, we could have used the money, but I didn't have the words to
Mhm.
explain it. So
Mhm.
now I can say, hey, ROI doesn't work. Don't do that. Straightforward.
Love that.
So thank you.
And also it's hard to argue with numbers, right? So like I think that's especially in that situation when
Correct.
you are trying to make an argument to your board, you can say, look, here's the math, here's how I got here, and therefore we should do this. Because I think, when we're in a space where we're sort of going on vibes, people can be like, but the vibes are really good about like having this person like doing all this outreach. Isn't that great? We're talking to our community. And it's like, sure. But as you're saying, like, it's actually not like we're not yielding what we could be if we invest our time more wisely, more effectively. So that's, vibes are good, but the math is better.
The math is yes, yes. Thank you for that.
All right.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been very helpful. Believe it or not, even for costuming, I'm thinking, even this map is gonna help me with my presentation for budget because I'm thinking, wait, I'm always telling them, hey, I need to buy more costumes, and they always say like, hey, we're spending a lot of money on costumes, and I'm like, yes, but this is an investment that actually gonna return because we use them for money. And it's hard to explain, and everything is exploding in my head right now. I'm like, ooh, I have a formula now.
Well, and I will. So Sabrina's going to send out an email. It'll have both of our emails on there. So, like, as you are kind of marinating and thinking about this, feel free to reach out to us. We're here to be a resource. If you're like, hey, can you make sure this makes sense? Anything like that, we're available and we're happy to help.
Yeah. And
Thank you so much.
go
I'll be
ahead.
waiting for the next meeting.
Yes, we will meet again on November 14th, and we'll talk a little bit about how we can put our newfound tools to use to make those cases. Maybe that'll help, blow your brain a little bit more on like how do we formulate that story and tell it and frame it in a really good, impactful way. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in a couple weeks, Sam.
Thank you
Like
very
Maria
much.
said, we'll be sending out the recording and a copy of the deck. So if you didn't, get anything noted, you'll have copies of that and then this worksheet and these
Thank you.
calculators as well. So expect that within probably Monday it'll get out. But if you
Fun.
don't get it, feel free to connect with Michelle at Resilience Initiative, and then she will kind of send everything out to you. But look for that from me and Maria. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a pleasure to meet you guys. Thank you.
Pleasure to meet
Kyle.
you. Bye, Sam.